Good evening. Tonight we watched The Invisible Woman, so just pretend, as I hold this up, that there's a W-O between the E and the M. But before we did that, we watched a couple other things. I watched, to start the day, the fourth Harry Potter movie, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I think I am justified in watching a movie about witches and wizards in the month of Halloween, but for good measure, this is the one that ends with a spooky maze and a spooky graveyard scene, and also includes some monsters along the way. But between that and The Invisible Woman, the two of us, me and these malevolent supernatural force that I live with, watched the Blade trilogy. Now, we watched them not 1, 2, 3, but 3, 1, 2. And this was on the advice of one Ed Greer, who, if that name is familiar to you, you probably listened to the Nerd Goat podcast, or you watched the Reboot It YouTube channel, or you saw him on Screen Junkies back when they had a guest budget. And I had tweeted to him that they rebooted, they did Twilight this weekend, but they've been dropping clues about what they might be doing, and it was clearly vampire related. One of the clues suggested that it might have been Blade, and so I said, Twilight fits in, we're having a somewhat of a vampire themed weekend, but if it had been Blade, then it would have been more appropriate because we're going to watch the Blade movies. And he said to me, watch Trinity first, then watch number 1, and then watch number 2, and he explained. And so that is what we did, because we had special advice from an expert. And that is, I think, the order in which I originally watched them, because I think Blade Trinity came out when I was just starting to rent movies on my own, and I rented it because it had Dracula in it, and I was just getting into the monster movies, and so I wanted to see this updated version of Dracula. And so I went for that one, and then it was years later that I finally watched Blade 1 and then Blade 2, and 3, 1, 2 really is the order to watch them in. There's a great button at the end of Blade 2 that is just a great way to go out. So thank you, Ed, for that. And then we watched The Invisible Woman, which is not tied to The Invisible Man or The Invisible Man Returns by characters or plot or how the invisibility is achieved. It's its own movie, and it's funnier. It embraces the funny side of the Invisible movies, which at least the first one, I don't remember laughing too much at the second, but the first one is he's very cackly, and if you could see the mustache, he'd be twirling it, and he's got a joke for every person that he kills. And nobody dies in this one, I don't think. But there were a lot of jokes, and there was a lot of, I'm invisible, I can do this, and on the part of the Invisible Woman. It was actually, at least part of it, was more of a superhero movie, because at one point she demonstrates that she can turn invisible at will with a little help. It's kind of like Popeye with the spinach. She has a little help from a thing, and she can turn invisible because she had the scientific process applied to her, and therefore she knows how to do it herself. And then there's also a kind of an Incredibles 2 twist at one point. So in that sense, it's kind of a superhero movie. And I had mentioned on Friday that the monsters of the 19th century are the superheroes of the 20th century. And what any of these things are in the 21st century, I don't think we're there yet where we can know. But there's that. But it is still kind of a monster movie, because what she uses the invisibility for is to take revenge on an abusive boss, not in the Elizabeth Moss Invisible Man movie sense of revenge. It's a much more 40s goofy slapstick revenge on a guy he's more rude than abusive, but is still a lot meaner than he needs to be, or should be, than anybody should be. But she takes her revenge, and she gets results, and that's just the first 20 minutes of the movie. So if the Invisible Woman were remade today, which I think I saw that Elizabeth Banks was working on or something like that, if it were remade based on the movie that we watched tonight, it would be all about the it was kind of 9 to 5 also. The movie 9 to 5 has shares some DNA with that plot line, but then the rest of it is she kind of gets stuck invisible, but not completely. And there's a side plot involving gangsters, and one of the gangsters, let's see, I've got to look up the Invisible Woman cast. Just to, one of the gangsters is, I was told, and I didn't ask specifically which one, but Shemp Howard is, again, I'm no expert on this, but the Supernatural Force said that he was part of the Larry, Curly, and Moe originally. I forget which one he was there instead of. Let's just quickly go to Wikipedia here. He was the best known as the third stooge in The Three Stooges, a role he played when the act began, and then again from 1946 until his death. So I guess he was replaced in the middle. But anyway, he was a stooge. So that's interesting. Also in the cast of note, John Barrymore, who is a big deal. I think there's a Barrymore Theater. I don't know if it's named after him. I don't know which Barrymore it is named after. Probably him. Or maybe it's Ethel. And then he is, of course, grandfather or great-grandfather to Drew Barrymore. The Barrymore family they're a big deal. But most exciting was Margaret Hamilton, who is, of course, the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz, which was 1939, the year before The Invisible Woman. It was interesting to see her colorless, literally colorless. The movie's in black and white, and she, you can tell, is not painted green in this movie. And she's very funny. You can hear in her voice that she's the Wicked Witch, and you can see it even though she spends most of The Wizard of Oz in the green makeup. You can tell that it's the face. It's in the eyes. It's in the nose. It's in the, not the mouth so much as the chin, and how the chin scrunches. It's a nice effect. So those actors and those elements. It was fun. We laughed some. It's any comedy is gonna age the way it's gonna age, and some things were probably much funnier in 1940, but for the most part, it was quite enjoyable. And it does make me wonder if the rest of the Invisible movies, we've got The Invisible Agent, The Invisible Man's Revenge, and Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man. That last one will probably be a comedy. The Invisible Agent and The Invisible Man's Revenge, who knows? The invisible effects were pretty nice. We got to see her fade out and then fade in while wearing clothes, so just her face would disappear, and that was pretty cool. There was a bit where she would be pouring brandy and picking up a glass, and occasionally you could see kind of like a bubble in the shape of a hand just off the glass, and I don't know if they were still using the black velvet trick at that point. Probably they were, but and then similarly at one point she's putting on her stockings while she's invisible, and because stockings by their nature they stretch and then they show a little bit, they give an idea of what is underneath them, of the leg underneath them, which in this case would have been the black velvet that was being used to make her seem invisible. And so you kind of got a chunk taken out of the stocking. It should have been solid stocking, but because it was showing what was underneath, it became invisible. So that was neat. It's neat to continue to see how the technique continues to evolve. Tomorrow is let's see. Just make sure I got the calendar here. Um, the Wolfman, which will be interesting to see since, as I mentioned on The Werewolf of London, The Wolfman is the only one of these movies where the movie represented on the cover, the flagship movie of that particular strand, is not the first one in sequence. So I wonder if uh, it's related to Werewolf of London or if it's completely its own thing. And I will find out to whatever extent I can tomorrow. In the meantime, have a lovely midnight.